Dear editor, I wish to talk with you about your article on the fall of Afghanistan. I agree with your assessment of the situation. After 20 years, the United States has pulled out of Afghanistan only for the country to immediately fall back under Taliban control, almost as if nothing has happened in these 20 years. Many American veterans are going through significant emotional stress as the events that have transpired have called their choices to join the military and fight in Afghanistan into question. However, as you noted in your article, these veterans are relatively few in number, and a disastrous end to this war is more likely to be used as ammunition for political debates by politicians rather than it is to be used to evaluate and revise a more foreign American policy. Many on the right will blame the current President Joe Biden, while many on the left will say that former President Donald Trump is at fault as it was Trump's administration which negotiated the withdrawal of U.S. troops. I personally agree with your notion that the United States military was dealing with an environment that they weren't properly equipped to handle in Afghanistan. And I also agree with your assessment that there were certain parallels to the failures of the United States in Vietnam. However, I must say that the fall of Saigon and the fall of Kandahar have some very stark differences. For one, it was with the enemy of the United States. In Vietnam, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong were very motivated, and the civilians of South Vietnam, with experiences of the French Indochina War and the Second World War under the belt, believed in what the North Vietnamese stood for, an independent Vietnam free of foreign influence. Meanwhile, the people of Afghanistan do not really believe in the concept of nations and prefer to identify themselves by their tribes rather than as citizens of Afghanistan. And so these citizens of Afghanistan were rather apathetic to either the cause of the Taliban or the United States. Thus, when it came time for them to finally have to fight the Taliban on their own, much of the Afghanistan army put down their weapons and walked away. Meanwhile, back in Vietnam, the South Vietnamese army had fought right to the doorstep of Saigon. It was only when they received orders from their president to lay down their arms that the South Vietnamese army stopped resisting. The North Vietnamese military and Viet Cong's entrance into Saigon would also be quite different. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army, despite having fought fiercely up to this point, entered Saigon with great professionalism. Not a single shot was fired or a case of looting reported. This was due to the extreme discipline while taking the capital of Afghanistan was a lot more ragtag, with celebratory gunfire reported, as well as the fact that the Taliban had entered the area seemingly on their own time rather than as a unified, cohesive force. This makes sense, dear editor. South Vietnam's fall was an orchestrated event. The president of South Vietnam and his members of staff were at their posts right up until the North Vietnamese army came walking through the door. However, since the president of Afghanistan had fled without telling anyone else in the Afghanistan government, it meant that there was nobody there to manage the everyday life of the Afghanistan capital. The U.S. got into brief negotiations directly with the Taliban, and the decision was made. The U.S. would control the airport so they could get their people out, as agreed, while the Taliban would take control of the rest of the city. All of this transpired over the course of less than 12 hours. The Afghanistan army had simply ceased to exist, along with the Afghanistan government. These were very obvious points of difference between these two incidents. But I agree with your point that the two events ultimately were a result of the same mistakes being made by the U.S. government, with the differences in the time and organization of these respective defeats coming down to the local cultural differences between Afghanistan and Vietnam, respectively. I agree with you, therefore, that is in fact a risk. It is only a matter of time before these mistakes are repeated yet again by the United States government, potentially with even more disastrous consequences.